Okay. All right, so we're going to skip all the agency disclosure and possible representation and wire fraud, and we're going to start with the listed residential listing agreement. And I kind of like, I've never done it this way, so we're going to fill it out together, or I'm going to fill it out in front of you as I explain it. So this date prepared, this is a legal reference date for a document. So today's date, if we were writing a listing agreement today, is 4/24. And that'll pop in. And then you are looking for your seller name here. So Anthony, can we use you as an example? You're going to be my seller today.
Fantastic.
Okay. And Anthony, do you have a real wife, or can we make you a fake wife?
I have a fiance, but yeah, we can make a new one.
Okay. How about, who's your star crush?
No, you put me on the spot here. Why don't we just put my fiance then? Her name's Sheila.
Oh, what a sweet guy. Okay, let's do it.
All right.
What's her name?
Sheila. Sheila.
Last name?
Nathan, like the hot dogs.
Nathan, like the hot dogs? Like that?
Yep. THA. There you go.
Okay. So Anthony Rulo and Sheila Nathan are going to are going to sell their home. And guys, if we are writing a listing agreement, we are always Keller Williams Beverly Hills, right?
Yep.
Okay. So then you have to have a listing start date. Keep in mind that you don't actually have a listing until this date occurred. So if you put a future date in here, that could be problematic. I like to always make my listing start the day that I get it signed. However, if you do that, there's a rule that you have to put the listing on the MLS within 48 hours. Okay, so that makes it pretty tough. So there's a workaround. I use these two forms. It's called SELM, and that's a seller's instruction to exclude from multiple listing service. And then when I know I have all my photos and I'm actually ready to go live on the MLS, I actually take a modification of terms for the listing, and I actually just delete the SELM in its entirety, and I modify the listing start and end date. So you see we have the 24th here, but it might take me up to 10 days to get all my collateral material ready. So that modification of terms I'm going to write might say that I'm starting my listing on May 5th. Make sense? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So can anyone tell me what our standard listing period is? What industry standard is?
Is it 6 months?
Yeah, 6 months. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. However, right, guys, we can have shorter listing periods. We can have longer listing periods. That's negotiable between you and your client. Okay. I don't recommend taking listings for longer than 3 months because you're going to put a lot of time, effort, money into it. But if you have to, and it's a calculated risk for you that you want to do, you can do it. All right, next line here. This is going to be the property address. Make sure that you get the legal address from title, because areas like Venice, Sherman Oaks, these are all Los Angeles. Same with Brentwood. Brentwood actually is a legal city in Northern California, but we have an area of Los Angeles called Brentwood. So you wouldn't be typing in 123 Example Street, Brentwood, California, and 90049. You would be typing in Los Angeles, California 90049. Actually, never mind. We have those lines later down. So Example Street, and then I would say situated in the city of Los Angeles, county, Los Angeles, and then my zip code. So we're gonna pretend like it is Brentwood, okay? And then the APN number. APN number is always gonna be in a 4-digit dash three digit number as long as it's in LA County. So it'd be something like this. Okay. If it's not 4 digit dash 3 digit dash 3 digit, then there's something wrong. All right, let's see. The next line, we don't do mobile home sales here. That's actually considered personal property. It's a different type of licensure. And then if you were to be involved in a conservatorship or a probate, you would check this box. And do you see this little circle that's going on? And at the top here, probate listing addendum was successfully added. Do you guys see that? So when you check boxes in your documents that you are preparing, particularly listing and purchase agreements, when you check boxes, it will auto-populate forms into the document section that you'll have to go and complete after you're done with your listing agreement. But in this case, we're not going to act as if it's a probate. That's a whole class in and of itself. The next line will be the listing price. So, hey, Anthony, are you a big baller?
No, let's keep it conservative. Let's say, I don't know, 750,000.
Oh man, how do you get a house for 750,000 in LA? I don't think so.
Okay,
How about
fine.
1.2?
7,500,000.
I like that one better.
Shoot for the sky, honey.
Yes, let's do it. All right. Sheila will thank you later.
Yeah.
All right. So once you type that in, you can see here it automatically writes in the words for you, spelling out the term. All right. Compensation to broker. All right. I want you to notice this language here, irrespective of agency relationships. And this tips you off that this is the total commission that's going to be offered to both buyer and seller's agents, right? So we know in our industry that is typically around 5%. If you guys can get 6, have at it. Don't lose your listing over it, but most of the time it's going to be 5%. Okay. And then here, this section. This is called sorry, I'm blanking. You have to, if your listing were to expire without you selling it, you would have a certain time frame in which after the listing expired, where you might still be due commission if someone that you showed the property to during the time you had it listed ends up buying it, but only if you provide a written list of names to the seller of those people, and you have to do it. Who's got an alarm going here? Sorry. It's okay. It would only count if you provided this written exclusions list prior to the expiration of the listing. So if your listing expires on one day, it'll always expire at 11:59 p.m. You need to make sure that written list gets over to them before. And just so you guys know, the industry standard for the time frame in which you could enforce this is 180 days. You may have a seller that wants you to modify that. That's up to you. It's a calculated risk, okay? I don't think I'd ever do anything shorter than 90 days. All right. Moving on here to section D. This is about the portion of the commission that's going to go to the buyer's agent. So if you have a 5% total listing, you're going to offer 2.5%, half of it, right, to the buyer's agent. If you get 6%, some listing agents try to keep more. I don't know how ethical that is. If you're doing a lot of extra work or extra things for the client, perhaps then you're going to take a little bit more. If you do that, there is a certain disclosure within the MLS where you would have to, when you enter your listing onto the MLS, and I know a lot of you probably haven't done that yet, there's a disclosure box, a drop down, and it's called listing broker advantage. So if you're ever taking more commission than half, so if you're offering the buyer's agent less commission than you're taking, first off, your client needs to be aware, but secondly, when you enter it into the MLS, that needs to be disclosed in that dropdown. All right, let's see here. So there are other options to do flat dollar amounts. I don't think our brokerage allows that. You'd have to get, sorry, you'd have to get permission from Michael Rosales before you could do anything like that. Okay. Section F. So if you were getting a listing that had been previously listed, you need to get a copy of the cancellation instructions from the between the seller and the previous listing agent. And you'll also want to find out if there's an exclusions list, because the same way you're protected, they're going to be protected if they provided one. A lot of agents don't know about this, or they're too lazy to do it, or they put a haphazard one together. So it's to your advantage to get a copy of the cancellation and get a copy of the exclusions list. And you can say in this section, you would write in, you know, previously listed, what happened? Previously listed with, you know, Coldwell, Banker, Beverly Hills, whatever it is, right? But that's not going to be the most common. It's just if you're getting a listing that was previously listed, that expired or was canceled. All right. So if there was an exclusions list, you would say see attached exclusions list, and this is the exclusions list from the previous agent if there was one. Okay, hopefully you guys aren't running into that very often. All right, next page. This is very important for you to have this discussion about items excluded and included with your client, because if you're getting ready to market a property, you're making photos, and you're starting to make verbal negotiations with agents or other buyers when they express their interest, you will need to tell them important things. So if your clients, and your client may not know this, they may think they're totally fine taking items, but the legal definition of what's included in a property sale is anything that's permanently affixed. So the most common issues we run into is like someone wants to take a beautiful family heirloom chandelier, right? The buyer might have an issue with that if they don't know about it. So you as a listing agent want to find these things out at the time that you take the listing so that it doesn't become a problem later. And even if you take that information, you put it in your listing, let's say you also put it in private remarks in the MLS, and you verbally tell the buyer and the buyer's agent, it does not stand unless you also write it into the purchase agreement. So, right, like this is your first step of it's in my head, I'm communicating it, but you also need to remember to actually write it into the purchase agreement or a counter offer to their purchase agreement. Okay. Additional items included. This is very rare, and I always use the same story from one transaction I had a long time ago. It was this condo with a private rooftop deck area, and they had all this big, beautiful patio furniture. And they said, we do not want it. Under no circumstance are we going to take it. And I was like, why? And they said, did you notice how narrow the passageway is up to our private rooftop deck? We bought this stuff, couldn't return it, and we had to have it craned in, and it cost thousands of dollars. We're not paying thousands of dollars to have this removed. So whatever buyer buys, they're going to have to take this patio furniture. Make sense? Nod, say yes. Okay. Moving on, leased or not owned items. If your client has solar panel systems or an alarm, you're going to need to find out if they actually own the systems or if they're leased. If they're leased, you need to find out what the agreement is, if it can be transferred, paid off. It's going to be different every time. We don't run into problems with this as often anymore, but there are still some problems. I haven't run into a problem with an alarm system in a long time. It actually costs the alarm company usually more money to send a technician out to remove it. So they say, no, you can keep it. but make sure that the seller calls and checks. You don't want to get caught last minute having to pay for an alarm system to get installed for a buyer because you didn't know it needed to be excluded, right?
Yep.
Okay. Multiple listing service. Guys, all of us that are board members of the Beverly Hills Greater Los Angeles Association of Realtors, or wait, what's the new name is just Greater Los Angeles Area Association Realtors, right? All of us are part of the CLAW multiple listing service. CLAW stands for Combined Los Angeles West Side. Okay. All right. If you were to be listing a property where, like, out of area, where that area is not the primary MLS that we use, you'll need to check this box.
Okay. Hey, Kristen.
Yes.
If you know, if for AC units and things that are attached, or even some appliances, would those go into that section that's a little higher up, into things that are included? Or
So any AC system that's permanently affixed, meaning like not like one of those rolling units, but any other AC system is 100% automatically included unless otherwise excluded.
Gotcha. Okay.
And what was the other one that you said?
Just like appliances, like
Appliances are totally up for negotiation.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if so, where would we put that in the section that was just above? Okay. Cool.
And it's a great conversation to have with your clients. You definitely want to have that conversation with your clients.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. If for some reason your client doesn't want to go on the MLS, this whole section is basically telling them what that means for them, that that's a big disadvantage. Whether or not they choose to go into the MLS, you guys do still need to sign this that you went over it, okay? That's another question I get very often. All right. Now, even though we've just looked at what, you know, like the advantages of listing on the MLS, if your seller still decides to not go into the MLS, you would check this box. And remember, and look here, this is that SELM form I was talking about for my workaround, taking a listing that's active right away, somehow circumventing that 48-hour rule to get the listing into the MLS. So my listing agreements always initially have this, because I'm going to take the listing, I want it to be active, but I don't have photos, I'm not ready for market yet. So I do that SELM form, and then when I have all my photos, when I know it's time, I draft the modification of terms that deletes this SELM form, right? And if we have time, I'll show you what that modification looks like, okay? So my listing agreements, I always have an SELM. But you know, but it's for strategic purposes. If your seller doesn't want to go on the MLS at all ever, you would have the SELM in effect for the entire time of the listing.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Okay, what if the seller wants the listing to go on MLS after 1 month? So for instance, he's giving me the listing for 3 months, and he told me that you can have it as a pocket listing for the first month, and then you should put it in MLS.
You can do that. There's actually a, here, I'll show you guys right now. I told you it auto-populates, right? So here we go. I'm going to pull up this SELM. You have options. So you would write claw in here, and then you would say market properly immediately, but do not submit listing to the MLS for a period of blank calendar days or until blank date. So there you go. That's your workaround, Nazanin, for your situation. Makes sense? Okay. So when I do it strategically for the way I want to do it, I check this box. And then I just delete as a modification this form entirely. And I modify my listing date. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
And I'll if we have time, I'll show that to you. Okay.
Wasn't there a new law enacted in the beginning of the year that had something to do with holding pocket listings? I'm
Yeah.
not sure 100% what it is.
Yeah, you can't market out outside of your own brokerage.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha.
My workaround still works,
Okay.
but you can't market it outside of the brokerage. That's the only difference. Okay, I'm going to go back to the listing agreement. And where were we? Here we were. Okay. So, yeah, you may be totally fine with writing your listing agreement to where it's in effect, 2 weeks from the time you guys sign. If you trust your client and that's how you want to do it, you can do it and you don't have to use my complicated workaround. But I do find that it works pretty well. Let's see. So I've never had a client do this, but apparently you can have the buyer opt out of automated estimate of value or link to a site containing such an estimate. But that might cause problems because that would keep the listing from going to places like Zillow, Redfin that have estimates on them. And we all know, unfortunately, that most buyers, they prefer using Zillow and Redfin to looking at the MLS. So, if a client ever says they want to opt out of that, I tell them I don't, it's probably not worth the risk of not getting the exposure on those very big websites because they're so heavily used by buyers. Okay, let's see. Broker and seller duties. I'm getting better at getting faster at this since we only have an hour instead of 3 now, right?
Yeah.
Let's see here. Okay, so this section here, investigations and reports, seller agrees. So I don't often use this section, but on a very rare occasion I will. When I walk in and I can tell that there could be major structural or foundation issues, or I see a lot of wood, like rot damage, termite infestation, I sit down with my seller and I decide with my seller that, maybe strategically it's much more advantageous to get these reports done, know what we're working with, maybe even get done prior to going to market, because it could be a deal killer. Also, if a buyer has an inspector that comes in and says that the work will cost significantly more than what whatever you and the seller, whatever provider you guys have, you might be able to get it done for much cheaper. And if it's done, no one can really argue with it. So if that's the case, and I'm like, I'll take the listing, but only if you get the pest report and the structural done within 5 days of the beginning of this agreement. Most of the time, I still wouldn't even put it in the contract because I'm just going to trust my client to do it. But I wanted you to understand maybe the just the strategy behind this whole section. Remember, once you have reports also, you have to share them with any potential buyers. Okay, so if you get a bad report and the seller won't do the work, you're going to have to supply that to a buyer during the disclosure period. All right, moving on. Any questions about that? No, okay. Let's see.
I think someone asked a question in the chat.
What?
Someone asked the question in the chat. It says, why not the HOA docs? ?
Oh, I'm not seeing chat because I'm doing the share screen. Who was that? Can you give me a question verbally?
Kurt?
Maybe read it. Read it.
Kurt asked, why not the HOA docs? ?
Oh, you could ask for the HOA docs ahead of time. If it's a condo, it's probably a smart move considering HOA docs take forever. But most of the time, escrow opens, orders them once we're opened. They cost quite a bit of money. So you can do it ahead of time or not. I typically get as much as I can before, but I wouldn't necessarily contractually tie the owner into getting it ahead of time. You can. I was just using the examples I think that are most common for the experience I've had. Let's see here. Also, just to add on to that, if you were to get homeowners documents, 12 months of minutes is one of the required sets of documents from HOA. And if you get 12 months of minutes, by the time you actually end up in escrow and sell, you might need to be adding to those minutes. Another month or two may have passed, correct? So, you know, that's maybe one of the reasons why I would hold off on HOA docs. But this is not about getting them. This is about contractually binding the client to getting them within 5 or blank days of the beginning date of the agreement. So this is me like, maybe I'm taking a listing I think might be not worth my time. I'm very concerned about being able to sell because of the condition of the property. All right. And so, yeah, guys, I can't see any, while I'm doing the share screen, I have no way to see the chat. So if you guys are chatting at all, just call it out to me. Let's see. All right. Photographs and internet advertising. I haven't had this happen, thankfully, but if a seller were to ever say, I don't want my property photographed, well, then you can do that. Although we all know in order to go on the MLS, we need at least one photo. So maybe it could be an exterior photo. Maybe it could be like a screenshot of like, you know, Google Maps or like the Google satellite view. But there does have to be at least one photo to go on the MLS. But most of your clients are going to want the property photograph because that's how you get buyers in there. Let's see. Key safe lockbox. Some clients do not want a lockbox. If that's the case, you check this box here. Okay. Sign. So some sellers do not want to sign. Most of them are fine with it. But just so you know, the city of Beverly Hills has very special size small signs that you have to get a permit for from the city. So a lot of HOAs restrict the size of the sign or they won't allow signs at all. So this is a place where you can have that conversation, so you know what you're actually allowed to do with the sign. It's not a great way to start off a deal if you got a listing at a condo, seller has no idea, you go and install your sign and the HOA company calls your client, the seller, and complains, right? So make sure you ask those questions, particularly if it's a condo. Let's see here. Now, if the owners, Anthony, if you and your fiance actually held property to title in a trust, and it was instead, you know, let's see here. It was instead the, oh, do I have this in the wrong spot? Yeah, I do. If it was instead the Rulo Nathan Trust dated 2017, then you would have to check this box here on page 4, and a trust advisory form would auto-populate just like that SELM did when we checked the box. Now, if the seller says, I'm only selling if I can find a replacement property as part of my resulting transaction, we generally refer to that as a contingent deal. I don't like that term because there are so many contingencies in all of our deals. But in real estate terminology, when we say we have a contingent deal, it generally means a buyer or seller needs to either make a purchase or a sale of another home in order to make this one valid. And if they can't do that, they're not going to sell. So if that's what they tell you, you know, that's a calculated risk for you to assume.
Is that under the assumption that it's in the same time frame as your listing agreement, right?
Yes. See, intends to include a contingency to purchase a replacement property. That would mean totally that this is, yeah, they need to enter contract and be accepted. They may allow you to accept an offer on the listing prior to them closing.
Right.
They may even allow you to accept it prior to them identifying their replacement property, but you would then need to subsequently make like a counter offer, whatever buyer was making an offer on your listing here, and say, hey, just so you know, your offer is contingent. You know, our counter offer to you is that the seller has to find and close on a replacement property before you can finish your purchase of this home.
Okay.
And that can get really complicated. It doesn't always have to be on completion of sale. It could be upon entering escrow. You can write it a lot of different ways. And the form that you'd have in your purchase offer duties, part of this, it's a very, very big, all-encompassing, kind of confusing form. It's very hard for me. So if you're going to have a contingent sale, even if you're not ready to go to the market yet, you don't have any offers yet, I would highly recommend pulling up the contingency. I'll show you that document. We have time. Pulling it up and just reading it and making sure you're familiar with it. Let's see. So once again, if it was the Rouleau Nathan Trust and not individual names, you would have to check this box, representative capacity agreement. But in this case, we have natural names, but I do want you to see the document because these are very common ways to hold title. The most common way to hold title to a property is in a trust. And that is because if it's the only way to avoid probate court, if the owners of the property were to pass and they want to pass on their assets to the descendants that they've left them to. So even with a will, a property goes to probate court. If it's in a trust, it's straight up transferred. Okay, so that is the end of the listing agreement. I'm going to go back now and show you these additional documents I've been talking about. So sure. And so you can see, you know, if it was the Rouleau Nathan Trust, I would check this box. I don't know why it's not checking. I think I have a little glitch going on. But if it was an entity that was like a corporation or an LLC, you would check one of these. And then down below, you're actually going to print the representative's name. So, you know, that would be Anthony Rouleau. And then the title would be trustee. But he could be a co-trustee or a successor trustee. So you always, trust can be set up with different permissions. So you probably, if you're selling a listing that's in a trust, you probably want to ask your sellers for a copy of their trust and make sure title looks at it also. Okay. And then, so the seller would sign it at the time of the listing, and then at the time of the sale, the seller re-executes it again, but so does the buyer. Okay. Sorry, not the seller re-executes it again, but the buyer needs to be made aware that, you know, this is a trust. This is basically proof to the buyer that the seller actually has authority to sign on behalf of the property and sell it to them. Make sense? No? Nazanin, I'm seeing a little.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. What was the other one? I was talking to you about, yeah, when we did the SELM, this one, my strategic way of doing it where I do not submit the listing to the MLS. Let me show you what I do when I remove that. I'm gonna move this, all forms. Okay, so it's called modification. So modification of terms and authorization. And here, I would say this is a modification to my listing agreement. We wrote it today, right? So there's my date. You would put in the brokerage, and here are our sellers' names, right? And so under other, I would say SELM dated 4/24. I actually like this way of teaching. I might use this more in our classroom when we're back. Is hereby deleted in its entirety. And then I also want to say, so maybe I would make this like item 1. Listing period is hereby modified to commence. So let's say I thought I was going to be ready on May 5th, right? Commence May 5th, 2020 and expire November 5th, 2020. And that is how you cleaned up. And that it's basically a way of cheating the system, of having a valid listing, but then cleaning it up. So once you have this signed, all of a sudden, guess what? I know I'm ready to go on the MLS May. I just fixed my problem of that 24 hours between having a valid listing agreement start and that 24-hour rule of going to the MLS. So though I've had my listing agreement actually active since the 24th, I just changed it to the 5th. Anybody know how I get around the rules that way? This is a legal way to do it. It's not considered shady. All of the big agents in the office do it. Our broker would teach you the same thing. And I've been doing it for decades like this. So do we have any more questions about any of these documents or the listing agreement?
Yes, I have a question. So
Yeah.
legally, even if it's a pocket listing only for 1 month, you still have to submit that to MLS. But the way that you added this modification,
You don't have to submit it to the MLS if it's a pocket listing.
mhm.
And yes, the way I did this modification and based on what you were saying, you would want to do it this exact way.
Okay, got you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And when you're ready to do it, let me know and I'll take a look at it for you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else? We're actually done early. I always love residential listing agreement class. It's so short.
Great.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well then, if we
Thank
have
you.
more questions, yeah, you're welcome. And just so you know, because our classes are shorter and I know we haven't got through most of our larger documents, here is my phone number. You can always call me if you have questions. Since I'm not able to give you your full lessons, here's my phone number. You can call me if you need help with anything, okay?
Sure.
Okay. So I guess take care, guys. I'm gonna get outside since it's super hot and I'm gonna enjoy that sunshine.
It is.
Bye, thank you.
Enjoy.
Bye, it's really nice
Thank
meeting
you,
you
Sarah.
guys.
Have a
I
nice
miss
weekend.
you.
Thank
Mwah. Bye,
you.
guys.
Well, bye.
Bye.